welcome back to another episode of the Chief of Staff Show. Today, I'm so glad to be joined by Shaun Bemis. Shaun, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to get into all of this and chat a little bit.
Yeah, so Shaun, you are a Chief of Staff. However, you've had roles before where you haven't held that title. And that's so common in our profession where we're, operators, we're administrators, we're in project management, we're in all of these different things, and we're serving as chiefs of staff without the title. Today, I really wanted to dive into that and sort of talk about your experience being a chief of staff without having the title, how that's played out in your career. And I also want to get to how did you realize that you were actually a chief of staff? But let's start with some of the roles you've held in the past that have been essentially like a de facto chief of staff.
Yeah. So I started out, I had a 20-year Navy career, and the second half of my career really was by and large a chief of staff role. So if you're familiar with, any of the military structure, you have officers and you have enlisted. Officers handle the up and out. Enlisted really handled the down and in day to day. I was enlisted, and so as I got to a certain point where I was senior enough, I had a principal. I had that officer that their job was to worry about the up and out. They would come with, hey, these are all the things the boss wants. This is the additional things that are on your plate, and I would have to kind of task organize, look at our personnel, look at the budget, sometimes say, hey, deadlines have to move, sometimes say, all right, you want D to be done, A, B, or C can't. One of those is falling off the plate. Different things like that. So it was really when I was retiring from the military that I was trying to figure out, okay, what do I do when I grow up? And I realized that a lot of what I did was a in fact, chief of staff role. So I really dove into that. I went to the Crystal Group. They have a certification. So, I got that and ended up at a Danish startup actually, where I was the lone American and I was doing really everything on the operations side. But where I really tried to embody those chief of staffisms was in the advice to the C-suite, right? Is they had some things that worked great in Europe and they bring them to me, and I'm like, guys, I'm not going to pitch that in the U.S. Like, it's never going to happen. But these are the things we can do, and I would kind of iterate on their ideas and then execute within the United States. So, I've really kind of embodied that strategic vice, operational, tactical. How do you guide kind of the leadership and helping them understand, hey, these are our resources, these are our personnel, these are our left and right limits, and what we can realistically accomplish and do well with all of your strategic thinking.
Yeah. And that's, like you said, exactly what a chief of staff does, guiding the leadership, offering strategic advice, helping with prioritization. And hey, if we want to do A, B, and C, we can't do D. At what point did you realize, or was it right from the beginning, or what point did you realize that you were functioning as a chief of staff and that chief of staff was something you were really interested in?
Yeah, so it really was when I was transitioning out of the military. I kind of found this group of guys that had gone from the military and in particular like special warfare roles into high level sports. And I coached youth soccer for a while and I always loved that. And I saw this opportunity to kind of go for it, right? And I was looking at roles like, culture development, leadership development within sport. And I actually got talking to an NHL team, and they were the ones that brought it to me and were like, no, we would see you as a chief of staff. And I actually interviewed with them for months, made it through both the assistant GMs, and then kind of, the decision maker wouldn't even take the call. He was the second oldest GM in the league at the time. And he was just like, I've been doing this for 40 years. Why do I need that
Mm-hmm.
guy? But that's really when I saw, hey, the cross-functional leadership, the ability to implement things, keep things on track, that's when I had that moment where I'm like, I've been doing this for 10 years. Like this was my role as a senior enlisted where I had one officer that I was responsible for and like all of those different things. So that was kind of the moment. It really came to me. It wasn't something I saw. It was someone that saw that skill set within me and they said, hey, we want to dig deeper.
Yeah, I love when that happens. I had a similar experience where I was an EA and a project manager, and I had a boss who needed a chief of staff and was like, "You're it."
Yeah.
So that's always cool when that happens. And then it is sort of like a light bulb moment, like, oh, like this is a really cool thing. That's another reason why I'm so passionate about bringing awareness to it, like having this show
Right.
and different things that I do, because there's a lot of people who are functioning as chiefs of staff and they don't even realize it. And then when they learn
Right.
about it, they're like, that's actually really cool. Now, the unfortunate flip side is, like you said, sometimes whether they're older people or they've just, been in their ways for a certain time where they haven't had exposure to the chief of staff profession, they don't realize its value. And
Right.
so they're like you said with your guy, just like, no, I don't, I've been doing it for so long without a chief of staff, I can keep going. But yeah, so that's always a hard part. Have you encountered that in other roles where you're serving as a chief of staff essentially, but they're just not recognizing it or not interested? How has that played out?
Yeah, I mean, in my last org, where I was working for that Danish company, there was a little bit of that where there was just, I think they realized it. There just wasn't the title to it, right? Like my title for the longest time there was expansion manager, and I mean that didn't even scratch the surface of
Mhm.
what I was doing, right? So it really was one of those where I just kind of said, and I think this is what chiefs of staff do, is I just kind of realized, hey, here's a gap here. There's a problem here. I can solve that. I can
Yeah.
build a system. I can build a process, or I can just go do it myself and get it done, whether anyone's asking me to or not. And that was really a lot of what my role was. I mean, I think some of that came from my military time of just like, hey, there's a problem. Let's just solve this thing
Yeah.
and get it done. And so, I don't I think part of that was filling that role was just a little bit of, hey, it's just happening whether they realized it or not, whether I had the title or not. That was the thing. I think the other piece of it that I'm seeing is, every chief of staff is different. Every relationship, and it is a relationship, right? Like it's such a broad title, and it really is like, defining a relationship, right? So like it's complicated, right? It's just one of those like what does it really mean? What does the principal need? What are the chief of staff's skills that they can bring to the table to complement the principal's weaknesses, those type of things. And so, in particular, when you approach someone, you're like, "Hey, I'm looking for a chief of staff role," and they're like, "Well, what does that mean?"
Yeah.
And to be honest, it's almost like I want to say like, well, let me speak with the principal. Like, let me get to know them, and then I'll tell you what that relationship looks like, what that position would look like, and what it truly means. And I found that to be a bit difficult at times because it is new, and it's not as simple as just saying, hey, sales director. Like everyone immediately knows sales director. Got it, like, and I know exactly what they do and how they do it and how they're measured. Chief of staff, it looks different in every organization.
Yeah, I love that you're highlighting that ambiguity because it's so true. And some people see that as, a risk or problematic. But in my perspective, I'm like, the flexibility is really cool, especially for those
Yes.
of us who are generalists. You had this 20-year long career, I'm sure, doing a million different things during that tenure. And so being able to bring those strengths and plug in, fill in the gaps wherever, that's kind of the cool thing about it to me. So I'm always like, really lean into that ambiguity, like you said, find out what it is that the principal needs and then look at how your strengths can complement their needs.
Yeah, 100%. It was really fun for me when I went down that sports path because I did talk to a handful of organizations and I didn't speak to a single one. And I was in particular targeting the sporting side, right? Like a lot of on the business side, they had them or they came outside of sports and they were familiar with the chief of staff role. On the sporting side, a lot of them were prior athletes and like, they just didn't have that traditional business upbringing. You could run those organizations like a business and to be able to go in and like I was literally writing job descriptions and then presenting them to professional sporting organizations saying, I can do this for you, and drafting it at the 30,000 foot view but
Mm-hmm.
saying, let's have a conversation and I can get that down to the 10,000 foot view. And then we can even talk about what does it look like daily. So it was a lot of fun. And like you, I see those as opportunities. It's not scary to me. It's an awesome opportunity to go in and say, this is exactly what I can do for your organization based on your needs, where you currently are and where you want to be.
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of that also, like of pitching yourself for a role. And
Yes.
it's a especially a unique advantage for chiefs of staff because they're not yet so ubiquitous in every organization that you can come in and say, hey, you don't have a chief of staff. Here's what it means. Here's what a chief of staff does. Here's how I'm uniquely suited to be your chief of staff. And being able to pitch that position really gives a lot of people an advantage. I work with a lot of my students and clients, and I'm like, find orgs that you want to work for. And it sounds like you are already doing that. You're
I can bring something different, that generalist kind of mindset to say, look, I'm not jaded by how the industry is. I'm not jaded by the old way of doing things. I can come in, I have enough background in the industry that it's not a total learning curve, but I can bring something fresh as well as just someone who can just get things done. And
yeah.
so and it's one of those too, like I said, it's a relationship. I also don't get discouraged, even though, I mean, I do get discouraged at times, right? But like,
Sure.
in the job search, I do my best not to get discouraged because I understand, like, it just takes the one yes, and it's not a complete reflection on, my background and my skill set. Like, there are people I spoke to that I'm like, that wouldn't be the right fit for me. Like, I would not be the right fit for that principal for reasons X, Y, and Z. So it's just trying to find that right person that's willing to pick up the phone and say, hey, let's go. Let's figure this out. Let's write that job description that makes the most sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like part of it too, if I'm hearing you right, it's a similar thing across industries of where there's not as much awareness yet of how the chief of staff is effective. So as much as it is cool to pitch, it also is hard to sell, right? It's like,
Yes.
just trust me, you need a chief of staff. You probably have someone functioning as a chief of staff, and you're just not giving them the title, as we know from our prior experiences of,
Right.
people need this level of support where it's strategic, it's executing, it's the high level and in the details. They need the type of support. They just don't realize it yet. So that it's
Right.
definitely a tough hill to climb, but I'm sure something is going to come through soon. As far as, do you have any advice for others who are sort of in this process?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing I could say is just I recently joined a chief of staff group, and one of the ways they framed it was, there's three pillars. You're the master of time, you're the vision Sherpa, and then you're the chief networking officer. And in particular, with the chief networking officer, my experience as I'm looking for a new role is trying to talk to as many people as I possibly can. 1,000 cups of coffee, as many conversations as I can have. That sometimes it literally is just getting on the phone and just being like, I want to share my story. I want to hear your story. Hopefully it brings some value, reaching out to somebody and then saying, hey, we don't have an opening. That's great. I understand. I would love to just get to know you. And you never know where those conversations are going to go. You never know what you're going to learn, what resources are going to come from those things. And I think additionally, just the other day I was asked, it was a sports apparel company I was speaking to. And someone was like, look, you have no industry experience. What are you going to bring? And kind of one of my comments to them was like, well, I got to you.
Yeah.
Like I was able to network to you, and
Yeah.
you're not the only one. Like, I have this Rolodex of people, to use a boomer term and date myself, but like, I have this stable of people that not only do I know, but like are willing to get on a call with me or answer an email when I say, hey, I just got this new role. Here's my first big problem.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen this in the industry? How would you go about solving this? And people want to help. People genuinely, truly want to help. In particular, those people that are willing to get on a call. So, having those resources, getting your name out there, learning as much as you possibly can is really the best advice I can.
Yeah, and I think networking is sort of like a double benefit for chiefs of staff. One, of course, we want to network so that we can expand our relationships and build and develop those relationships for whatever reason we might need them in the future, but also because it's a great skill to develop because you'll need it in the
Yes.
role. As a chief of staff, you still need to be networking, whether that's internally to make sure that you can build relationships within the team and so it's easier
Yes.
for you to facilitate across departments, or whether it's externally with customers and stakeholders. The networking piece is so important. So I'd love to hear that you've joined a group. I'm always encouraging that, but I'm also always telling people just network with your chief of staff peers,
Yes.
network with the decision makers and the
Yes.
CEOs and the founders that could possibly be hiring you or tell people in their networks about you. Is that something that you also practice?
I absolutely, there was an organization to sign up. So I run ultra marathons for fun. I'm not sure how fun it is, but that's kind of my passion. Anyway, the ultra sign up is a website where most of the races sit, and you can sign up for those races, register, all that kind of stuff. And the CEO, this is months ago, but I'm on LinkedIn and he put out like, hey, I want to be more intentional about my LinkedIn connections. Reach out, let's have a cup of coffee. And I immediately was like, hey, let's chat. And I pitched in during the course of that conversation, I pitched myself, and I said, hey, I'm a chief of staff. This is what I would do, on and on. And he didn't have anything at the time. Like, I think if nothing else, it's good practice, right? If
Hmm.
nothing else, it's the ability to get comfortable with your elevator pitch, with speaking about the ambiguities, with speaking about what you bring to an organization. But again, you never know, right? Like he's having conversations daily with other people I would want to work for. And there may just come a time where someone's like, hey, I've heard of this chief of staff thing. And he's going to be like, oh, hey, I remember this Shaun guy. Let me get you in touch with him and do that kind of things. The other piece of advice I got was actually board members. If you're going to start looking at startups in particular, I love the startup space. A lot of times you'll find startup CEOs, C-suite, they may not be as familiar with the chief of staff concept, but there's a
Hmm.
good chance board members will be because they're coming from more traditional business backgrounds and things like that, from a more established industry or at higher levels. And so I've done my best to reach out to board members. I haven't had as much luck, but I'm trying, right? I'm trying to get my name out there and say, hey, I want to have a cup of coffee. I want to hear how have you used the chief of staff in the past? What advice would you give for a chief of staff going into a startup? And then again, you never know. They may have some company that they've invested in or that they're a board member of, and they say, hey, my CEO really needs a chief of staff. I'm gonna get you in touch with them, and you're off to the races.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of actual intentional relationship building in the networking process is like, I'm not thinking, can you hire me tomorrow? But I'm thinking, hey, let's
Yes.
build a relationship. And if something comes up next week, next month, next year, even if you get into one opportunity and another one comes up 3 years from now, like that's the beauty of those relationship building pieces. And that's so cool. I love that you added that idea of board members too and like investors. Like that's you're spot on,
Yeah.
especially with startups because the CEOs are looking to them for advice.
Yes.
So that's a great sort of target there. Yeah. So do you have any other advice or any thoughts around others, maybe from your background where you haven't specifically had a chief of staff title, but it's what you've done in the past. You're fully capable of it and you're excited to bring it to another org in the future. Any advice for people in that same situation?
I think again, it just goes back to the networking and just learning how to pitch it, right? Because it's I think most people that were in my position, say in the military, would never make that correlation between the senior enlisted and the officer relationship being a chief of staff principal relationship, right? And by having those conversations, by being able to flush out my pitch, by being able to do all those things, you kind of realize, hey, I can take this bit and here's a story I can tell that ties it back in to being a chief of staff. Here's a project I did. And once you can start tell those stories of, hey, I'm sitting in Djibouti, Africa, and we just lost support from another unit that was helping us, and so we had to quickly stand up this $2 million intelligence support cell. And these are all the things that I personally did to usher that and make it happen, while in support of my principal, who on and on. It's that ability to tell those stories and tie it back to, and this is now how I could help when, you are going through the hiring process and you need to understand what ops and the supply chain and HR all need together to make this hire the right hire. Those are invaluable when you're having those conversations. So just the more you can talk to people and find those connections, and some of it is going back to people who maybe had those similar roles. I've actually spoken with a lot of military officers saying, ones I didn't work for, with just networking and just saying, hey, this is how I'm pitching this. What are your thoughts? And, is this applicable? And what am I forgetting? What am I missing in those
Mhm.
relationships that make sense in the chief of staff world in business? That's been super useful for me.
Yeah, really being able to translate those transferable skills because there's a
Yeah.
lot of places where there's overlap with the chief of staff role. Well, Shaun, I really appreciate you just sharing your insights, your experience, your background. Is there any way where people can find you if they wanted to get in touch with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Shaun Bemis, all together at the end. That's about the only social media I have. Unless you're a runner, you can find me on Strava. But other than that, I'm on LinkedIn.
Love that. Well, I'll put your LinkedIn link, I'll drop
Yeah.
that into the comments here so people can find you. But really appreciate your time and best of luck as you continue this search. I think with your your networking skills, all of the things that you've done in your incredible 20-year career and then with the startup space, it like you're going to be such an asset to an org really soon. So excited to see how that plays out.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.